and not seeing it as a lifelong approach to working with others that's other-oriented. But so, other folks that were surveyed included additions to the definition that wanted to expand the groups that we could be looking at to include gender and gender identity and gender nonconforming individuals, sexual orientation, religion, disability, national heritage and customs, and age, background. And there's people who have experienced trauma and how that can inform the interaction between a lawyer and client in a myriad of ways that I think is really important to learn about. And so I think people came at this from a really thoughtful perspective where they were thinking about this definition about being mindful and respectful and responsive to the beliefs, practices, needs, and identities of others. And I think in a lot of the writings that Sue Bryan and others who are teaching cultural competency in law schools look at is sort of that you're working with the client to inform you about their needs to some degree. You're not making assumptions about an individual based on what perceived group they may belong to. But just being more aware of the ways in which cultural background and heritage can impact your way of being in the world, and using that awareness to improve how we're communicating across cultures and support one another and improve collaboration. And I think something that I've also been struggling with is, I'm really happy to see and really encourage the clients I work with to really get involved in advocacy. Our organization is not an advocacy-based legal service provider, but I think there is a real importance for the clients to have a voice in the issues. And I think one of the mottos is by us, for us. And the young people we're working with should have a voice, or whatever population you work with, in the service delivery. I know some organizations are surveying clients on a variety of different issues, and I've been encouraging folks to include questions about whether they, in this area in terms of improving cultural competency and assessing how those needs were met. And I think this is also really helpful. Someone thought the definition should include knowing what you don't know and understanding that you might not understand the needs and priorities of the client. And there is a presumption that you're an expert and you know what the client needs in terms of the representation. And there may be cultural issues that are going to lead to you not serving your client's best interest because you're presuming that a certain result is the right result. And so, certainly I work with many young people who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents. And in some cases, if I meet them at a certain age, they have a remedy called special immigrant juvenile status. And that would help them if they were able to obtain that kind of immigration category classification to eventually regulate their status permanently and get a green card. However, they would never, even if they became a citizen, be able to sponsor from a family-based visa category the non-offending or the parent who did not maybe do any of those things. And so I was working with a family where a woman was raising a stepdaughter and a biological son, and we had met her stepdaughter, and she was the primary guardian, and we were able to help her stepdaughter gain permanency and a green card. And then we were exploring whether we would do the same application for her son. And what that would mean is it would enable him eventually to work and stay here without any sort of fear. But when we talked to him about the possibility that he would never be able to petition for his mom, in the future, that was a deal breaker. And the law firm, the pro bono law firm that was working with this family, was really surprised.
You are the first person to join the conference.
And, oh wow. This is going to make my presentation way more chill and groovy. So, I don't know if I should pause jokes. So that was an interesting learning experience, both for me and for the pro bono lawyers, because, you know, for me it was always about the client having the choice and the information they need to make the right decision for their family. And I think the pro bono lawyers were really surprised that the young person wouldn't do something that's going to benefit himself to the detriment of his parent in the future. And from his perspective, you know, this is the parent that sacrificed everything and did everything to help him, raised him, and, you know, he saw a pathway, maybe not now, but in a few years from now, if he ever develops a relationship with someone who hopefully is a U.S. citizen, and he has another pathway that maybe not, it may not be immediate, it may create more challenges for him to pursue his college degree in terms of access to funding, but, you know, he wants to have the opportunity to later help his mom. And, you know, the decision not to do that was really hard for some of the pro bono lawyers to accept. So I think that's an example, like a real life example of how not to assert your presumptions about what's right for this family when counseling. And so one of the ethical rules does tell you to be an advisor to your clients. And in order to do that effectively, you need to take all these different factors into consideration. And you're not going to be able to do that if you're not having a meaningful dialogue with your client about what their needs are and being respectful of that and not asserting your own knowledge or values onto that person. And so here, you know, being able to understand that you don't understand their needs and priorities, that's sort of why that example was brought to mind for me, knowing when to ask and listening. And I think we're also under a lot of pressure as lawyers to do things quickly and efficiently, and especially in legal services, you know, it's very numbers driven from the funder's perspective. And I think building in time to listen to your client and give them the space to tell the story is really, really important. And you should be able to identify when your privileges get in the way of building a trusting attorney-client relationship, and that, you know, prioritizing education over family could be one of those examples. Recognition of power relationships. The failure to be culturally competent by a person in power can have ramifications for hiring, professional development, promotion, job security and satisfaction, and outcomes of representation of clients differently from failure by a person who doesn't have power over persons about whom they are insensitive. That was a little bit long. But I think we understand sort of that tension sometimes. You know, a little way that it's manifested is possibly like interrupting. A lot of times, you know, the client, like trying to get them like finishing their sentences and not understanding that that's a way that you're exerting your power as a lawyer and the pace and the flow. This was my definition actually, because I was borrowing from the medical profession in terms of seeking cultural humility and learning about cultures and being sensitive to those differences, and having a stance that is other-oriented, I think is really important. I don't know if there's a lot of lawyers out there who are drawn to the profession because of ego. Hard to say.
The emotional intelligence discussion earlier.
And so, you know, I think that, you know, I was drawn to service. You know, I think there, you know, you're sort of drawn to the areas that you're good in. I did one of those tests once that rank you in terms of like what motivates you, and apparently I would be good in sales, but only if it was based on altruism, not on like financial stuff, which means I'm never going to be like a millionaire. But it was just very interesting to me to learn that. And so there you go. And then this one was interesting to me because I think it is an evolving area, and someone was really honest by saying, I've never heard of a definition that sounds right or captures all of the relevant issues. And so I think that isn't the impetus for us to keep seeking and trying to develop this area. And so everyone seemed to agree that we have an ethical obligation to develop cultural competency. Well, maybe like one person, but you know, hopefully after this they felt differently after we had this conversation. And I think there have been some good articles. I think the Munir Ahmad article also looks at sort of the ethical